For call upon the honourable member for Richmond Hill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and again I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this particular issue. As I indicated earlier, of course, we are a nation of traders, and obviously one of the issues that clearly comes to mind is what approach are we taking in terms of our trade relations with our neighbours, particularly when we have about 85% trade with the United States. Well, clearly what we need to have, Mr. Speaker, is a vision. We need to clearly have a plan as to what we need to be doing. And I talked about the fact that although the Canada-Jordan Free Trade Agreement is an interesting approach, there's a wider market in that area in terms of the Arab Free Trade Area, which is very important with 18 states. The fact is that multilateral approach is absolutely critical, and given what's been happening obviously at Doha, we need to really push multilateral agreements. We need to push multilateral agreements, Mr. Speaker, in large part because our neighbours are clearly doing that. The Australians, the United States, the EU and others. And it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that we are a player. Given the fact that in the Jordan's case, Jordan is a very good example of a country where, in fact, modernization in terms of their monetary, their banking, their infrastructure has been progressing. And it is a good place to invest. And obviously, we recognize that, and we want to encourage Canadian business to do that. But without really bringing on organizations like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, bringing on the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, bringing on organizations that will have an interest in participating in this type of agreement, where we can encourage the best and the brightest in this country to be on the leading edge without some kind of overall strategy, Mr. Speaker. These kind of agreements are simply one-offs. And again, we need to hear from the government in terms of what overall approach we should be really taking in terms of providing the kind of leadership to deal with our competitors. And I go back again to the Asia-Pacific, again to say that in the Asia-Pacific we are not a player, and we need to be. We need to be particularly in places such as Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Cambodia and others. And what do they all have in common? They're all part of ASEAN. And again, while other countries are looking at doing free trade agreement with ASEAN, the 590 million people who live there, we are standing idly by. We can't afford to do that. And again, we need to be aggressive in these areas. If we're aggressive in these areas, Mr. Speaker, we can be able to compete, particularly in environment. In the environment area, Mr. Speaker, we are experts on the areas of clean water, on contaminated soils, on clean air. And again, environmental companies are very interested in participating in that. When I referenced my meeting with our Minister of Environment in 2007, July, and with King Abdullah of Jordan, I mentioned the fact that they were very interested in the environmental technology that this country has. And again, agreements like this hopefully will give an opportunity for Canadians to access those markets. But again, these are things that we should have been doing. We need to do it in a broader context as well. And again, without that kind of push, we're going to be left behind. We continue to do these one-offs. They're not necessarily the most productive or the most useful. Point out that in the provisions, speaking of the environment of this agreement, there are side agreements on labour cooperation and on the environment. And I would point out to you, Mr. Speaker, that on the environment, one of the things that I'm pleased to see is that we're going to comply with and effectively enforce the domestic environmental laws and not weaken the environmental laws to encourage trade or investment. That is important. We're not going to weaken them, we're going to strengthen them. And we're certainly going to ensure proceedings are available to remedy any violations of environmental laws. And again, Mr. Speaker, promoting public awareness, because the environment is extremely important not only for Canada, for Jordan, but in general in terms of what we can provide. And providing these kind of safeguards is obviously going to be important. It's going to be important for not only those countries and for the people in those countries, but again, sharing that expertise and getting our environmental companies involved in a way which, particularly on issues of desertification, dealing with the issues of irrigation, again, where we can provide expertise, particularly in an area of the world where water is in short supply. And again, Canadian expertise and technology can be part of the solution. But we can only be part of the solution. Again, Mr. Speaker, we only have one aspect here, with Jordan and the Middle East, and yet we have a trading area of 18 nations, which I again point out, whether it's Saudi Arabia, whether it's Egypt, whether it's the United Arab Emirates, we need to be a player. And I would hope that the government will come back and look at the issue of expanding this in terms of a multilateral approach, which will give us more access and more opportunities for Canadian business, because standing still is obviously not appropriate. We also have a side arrangement here dealing with the issue of labor, and again, guarantee the rights of freedom of association, the right of collective bargaining, abolition of child labor, elimination of forced compulsory labor, etc. Now again, I know that a colleague in the New Democratic Party raised this issue, and again, I would suggest that that is where the Standing Committee on International Trade will be able to bring witnesses forward, where we'll be able to make sure that if there are areas where people have concerns, hopefully those concerns can be addressed, and that any agreement, of course, can be strengthened. That is absolutely important. The protection of workers, to make sure they have the ability to organize, the ability for them to carry out their activities in a way free from discrimination or fear from pressure is obviously very important. And again, that is one of the aspects of this agreement. But again, if there are opportunities to strengthen any of these, then we need to do so, because obviously it's a basic human right. We want to make sure that that is there and it's enshrined. We also want to make sure that when we look at Jordan in particular, it has a high degree of internal security and stability, and it is a free market-oriented economy. And again, that is something we not only encourage for Jordan. We need, Mr. Speaker, in fact, be encouraging that in other areas of the Middle East, where we can again continue to promote free trade opportunities, a free market, so that again we can be a major player. And obviously, Jordan has a well-developed banking system, communication system. Again, we can take advantage of that, and obviously, given the expertise that we have in those areas, that again would be very, very helpful, Mr. Speaker. There's no question, Mr. Speaker, that looking at tax rates, again with Jordanian and Canadian companies, there are opportunities again where Canada, I think, can play a role. But again, we have to go back to the issue of developing a more regional approach, because again, other countries are doing that. Other countries are saying that we, in a very competitive global environment, given the economic situation around the world, you cannot sit at home. You've got to be there, and that's what we're hearing from our business community. I hear that from small business and medium-sized business all the time. And I appreciate the fact, Mr. Speaker, that when we are looking at these issues, again, bringing those witnesses forth at the committee, that we say, okay, it's not simply approving one agreement, but again, it is how do we strengthen our role internationally and competitively in a manner which really addresses Canada's strengths. And whether it's in the environment and dealing with climate change, whether it's in telecommunications, in two particular areas where Canada is very strong, we also have to look at issues. We've talked about agriculture. We've seen where this will, of course, deal with those subsidy issues, and dealing with the fact that agriculture, very, very important because we export so much. And again, looking at opportunities. I mentioned the Japanese in particular are able to sign agreements with countries which we never would have thought of, like the Mexicans or the Filipinos, again dealing with agriculture. And so I think that if we really put our minds to it, Mr. Speaker, we can do more. And again, on this particular agreement, it gives us an opportunity to say, okay, if in fact we're not going to be successful at the Doha round issue, then we need to deal with it in a multilateral way. I know there are colleagues here who clearly see that as an opportunity, and I would hope that the Government of Canada will continue to show leadership, because again, our American friends, EU and others are not standing still. They are being very aggressive, and I guess certainly they realize what, and I know, Mr. Speaker, because of your own